Hello, my name is Larilyn Maligdong, and today we were discussing about historical research. Historical research. Some researchers argue that historical research cannot be considered scientific because it does not permit enough precision and objectivity. Others argue that it can meet the standards of inquiry of other methods such as experimental and survey research. Nature and value of historical research. As used by the Greeks, history meant an inquiry designed to reconstruct past events, and, in a sense, historical research can still be defined as a scholarly attempt to discover what has happened. Historical research has much to contribute to library and information science. Chronology. Chronology can be defined as simply the describing of events in the order of their occurrence, a process similar to the older concept of historical research. True historical research is concerned with analyzing and interpreting the meaning of historical events within their contexts. Importance of historical research to librarianships. A knowledge of history provides a necessary perspective for understanding the principles and practices of library and information science. Historical research can help to gain historical understanding of the long-term development of library collections, inform budgetary decision-making, provide a basis for decisions concerning services, and inform an investigation of changing information culture. Types of historical research. Hillway identifies 6 different types of historical research or documentary study. 1. Biographical research. 2. Histories of institutions and organizations. 3. The investigation of sources and influences. 4. Editing and translating historical documents. 5. Studying the history of ideas, and 6. Compiling bibliographies. There are a number of different types of historical research, ranging from the providential perspective of the 17th and 18th centuries to the more recent new social history in modern U.S. historiography, according to Alice Winkler, an expert on historical inquiry at the University of Texas at Austin. Sources of historical information. The data gathered in historical research can come from a wide variety of sources. Among the more commonly used are the following. 1. Official records, such as laws, deeds, annual reports of organizations, charters, and so on. 2. Newspaper and other periodicals. 3. Eyewitness accounts of events. 4. Archives. 5. Manuscripts. 6. Letters and personal diaries. 7. Biographies, autobiographies, and memoirs. 8. Historical studies. 9. Literary writings. 10. Oral evidence. 11. Memorials. 12. Catalogs. 13. Schedules, agendas, and so on. 14. Archaeological and geological remains, non-documents. Secondary sources of information can provide important insights and conceptual development not available elsewhere. Because secondary sources do not represent eyewitness accounts, the researcher should keep in mind their limitations and avoid an over-reliance on such materials. In evaluating secondary data sources, for example, a researcher should ask questions about the qualifications of the person responsible for the data collection. Evaluation of historical sources. In selecting specific sources of data for a historical study, it is critical that they be evaluated properly. The researcher should want to know if the sources are relevant to the study, substantial enough to be worthwhile, and competent, i.e., genuine, accurate, and reasonable. External criticism. In this chapter, we look at the process of external criticism, which is crucial to the credibility of historical research. External criticism may be used interchangeably with textual criticism and takes into account the provenance or origin of a document. Internal criticism. Babbie cautions historical researchers to always be wary of bias in the data sources and, if possible, encourages using data from a variety of sources representing different points of view. The more sources that point to the same set of facts, the more accurate the research findings, he says. Schaeffer recommends asking the following questions, among others, when evaluating the internal evidence of a document. 1. Do the real meanings of words differ from their literal meanings? 2. How well could the author have observed the things he or she is reporting? 3. Are there internal contradictions? 4. Are any statements inherently improbable? 5. Are factual data in agreement with standard reference works? 6. Does the document seem to call for further corroboration? The hypothesis in historical research. Using a hypothesis in historical research helps to increase the objectivity of the study and minimize researcher bias. The hypothesis provides a basis for considering various factors in relation to one another and synthesizing them into a generalization or conclusion that puts their overall significance in focus. For example, one could hypothesize that academic libraries have been used more heavily when they have had substantive library instruction programs. Collecting the data. The data collection technique for historical research, or at least for documentary research, basically involves putting together in a logical fashion the evidence. This process also often involves the comparing and reconciling of information gathered from two or more sources. The presentation of findings. In writing a historical report, the researcher should take care to be objective and to preserve intellectual honesty. The report is normally directed to the knowledgeable scholar, and the facts and interpretations should be presented so that the reader can evaluate conclusions in light of documented evidence. Library history. Historical research conducted in library and information science is often referred to as a library history. Shiflett defines library history as a rubric that covers a myriad of topics associated with libraries and other information systems. Some would argue that it has been an inferior type of history or historical research. Review of the more recent literature suggests that the quality of historical research in library history has improved. Bibliographical research. Some scholars would argue that bibliographical research is a special kind of historical research that takes the form of descriptive bibliography rather than systematic or enumerative bibliography. The latter is not considered to be true historical research, at least as prescribed by the scientific method of inquiry. There is no question that both are important scholarly endeavors that support the work of true researchers or historians. Systematic bibliography. Persons involved in the compilation of systematic or enumerative bibliographies are concerned with the book and other materials as an intellectual entity. Their purpose is to assemble information about individual works into a logical and useful arrangement. The results are one of the following compilations or lists. 1. Universal bibliography, a bibliography that includes everything published or issued in a subject field regardless of date of publication. 2. National bibliography, a bibliography that lists everything published and possibly distributed in a given country. 3. Trade bibliography, a bibliography compiled primarily to aid the book trade by supplying information as to what books are in print or for sale, when, where, and by whom they were published, and their price. 4. Subject bibliography, a bibliography that lists materials relating to a specific topic. Descriptive bibliography. Descriptive bibliography is concerned more with the book as a physical entity or material object. Sir Walter Gregg defined it as the study of books as tangible objects, rather than their contents in a literary sense. It is concerned with the relation of one book to another, and the question of which manuscript was copied from. This process can be broken down into more specific bibliographical research, including the following. 1. Analytical bibliography, which is concerned with the physical description of the book in order to determine the details of the physical process of its manufacturing. 2. Textual bibliography, which focuses on certain textual variations between a manuscript and the printed book or among various editions. It is more concerned with the author's words than with the physical aspects of the book. 3. Historical bibliography, which deals with the identification of original editions and the placing and dating of individual books. Other terms that are sometimes used to represent specific types of descriptive bibliography, or are comparative, technical, and critical bibliography. As Ronald McCarrow stated, bibliographical evidence will help us to settle questions such as that of the order and relative value of different editions of a book, or whether certain sections of that book were originally intended to form part of it or were added afterwards. Problem in historical research. A variety of problems are common to most types of research but tend to be particularly important in historical research, including the following. 1. Deciding how much data are enough. This tends to be a relatively subjective decision. At one time, historians generally attempted to collect virtually all relevant data. They now tend toward a more selective approach. 2. Improperly selecting data. Briefly stated, the historian must avoid improper or faulty selection of data, including such tactics as ignoring some data, exaggerating others, and so on. 3. Relying too heavily on secondary sources of information. This is particularly likely in studies not dealing with relatively recent events. 4. Investigating an overly broad problem. This is difficult to avoid because historical issues tend to be complex. 5. Failing to evaluate adequately the historical data and their sources. These techniques were addressed in an earlier section. 6. Failing to interpret the data. As was noted earlier, historical research is most productive when the researcher attempts to synthesize or integrate the facts into meaningful generalizations. 7. Reading the present into the past even though the historical data may not support such an interpretation. Mowley calls for a report that will make a significant contribution on the basis of new knowledge and not simply represent uninspired hackwork. He, and others, emphasize the desirability of a writing style that will attract as well as form. A summary. There appears to be a general reluctance to accord to historical conclusions the kind of logical validity that the conclusions of other sciences are deemed to possess. The criteria for evaluating historical research are much the same as those for other methods of research. It is important for the researcher to draw upon primary, rather than secondary, sources as much as possible.